Jodi Arias made headlines when she was charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander in June 2008. After the gruesome, salacious details surrounding the murder were revealed, Arias testified during the 2013 trial that she had killed Alexander in self-defense. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and later sentenced to life in prison after 2 juries deadlocked on whether to impose the death penalty. Convicted killer Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California. In the summer of 2008, Arias made national headlines when she was charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander, a 30-year-old member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who was working as a motivational speaker and insurance salesman. Arias and Alexander had met at a conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, in 2006, while he was living in Arizona and she was a resident of Palm Desert, California. By the following year, they were a committed couple. After only 5 months as a couple, however, the two went their separate ways in late June 2007, but still maintained a sexual relationship. On June 9, 2008, Alexander's body was found in a pool of blood in the shower of his Mesa, Arizona home by friends who had become increasingly worried about his whereabouts. Almost immediately after entering the residence, the young men began taking in the heinous crime scene. In the bathroom, they found Alexander with a gunshot wound to the head, more than 24 stab wounds and a deeply and widely slit throat. Investigators later determined that the murder had occurred 5 days before his body was found on June 4, 2008. Arias quickly became the focus of investigations. She was indicted on first-degree murder charges on July 9, 2008, and arrested in California soon after. Arias initially denied any involvement in the killing, despite the discovery of her DNA mixed with Alexander's blood at the crime scene, but she later changed her story, claiming that she and her ex had been attacked by 2 masked intruders. After killing Alexander, the criminals decided to let her live, she told the police, adding that she chose not to alert authorities at the time because she feared the intruders might seek revenge. Testimony in Arias's trial began in early January 2013, which was aired live to the public and became a media sensation. The following month, the alleged killer took the witness stand in her defense, from where she would testify for 18 consecutive days. Already infamously known for her different accounts of Alexander's murder, Arias stated that she had killed her ex in an impassioned act of self-defense. She testified that Alexander had frequently abused her and that she killed him after he came at her in a fit of rage when she dropped his camera. She also claimed to have suffered memory loss as the result of emotional trauma experienced during the incident, with a psychological expert corroborating that she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. "Lying isn't typically something I just do," Arias stated during the trial in response to a query from the jury. "The lies I've told in this case can be tied directly back to either protecting Travis's reputation or my involvement in his death, because I was very ashamed." On May 8, 2013, Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. 5 jurors found her guilty of premeditated murder, and 7 found her guilty of both premeditated and felony murder, a verdict that sparked elation among Alexander's family members. However, the judge declared a mistrial in the penalty phase after the jury deadlocked on whether Arias deserved the death penalty. The penalty retrial began in October 2014, with a new jury revisiting the same evidence presented the first time around. This time, the focus was on the psychological makeup of both parties, with the defense attempting to portray their client as a vulnerable woman and Alexander as emotionally and physically abusive. In March 2015, the second jury was unable to agree on Arias' sentence as well, removing the option of the death penalty and leaving punishment terms to Judge Sherry Stevens. On April 13th, after expressing remorse for her actions in a statement, Arias received a life sentence without the possibility of parole after 25 years, and she began serving her term at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville. Although Arias appealed her conviction and sentencing, the process was bogged down by transcript errors and omissions. The court record was finally declared complete in April 2017, nearly 2 years after the appeals process began, and that summer a 2018 deadline was established for the defense and prosecution to file their legal briefs. Additional complications surfaced in October 2017, when Arias alleged in a civil suit that the head of her legal team broke attorney-client privilege by disclosing confidential information for the expressed purpose of financial gain and his own public redemption in a tell-all book about the case. Alvin Neelley was madly in love with Judith Ann Adams, later to become Judith Ann Neelley, the troubled daughter of a large family from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. No stranger to trouble himself, Alvin had been committing petty crimes and stealing cars throughout his young adult life. Not much else is known about Alvin Neelley's early life before his notorious crime spree, other than he was born in Georgia, where he would later die while behind bars. Soon after meeting Judith, Alvin left his wife and 3 children. He eloped with her in the summer of 1980, and she became Judith Ann Neelley, a teen bride to a much older man. While she still hadn't fully recovered from the death of her father, an alcoholic who perished in a fatal motorcycle accident, it was ultimately meeting and marrying Alvin Neelley that would be Judith Ann Neelley's undoing. The two began a life of crime together, committing armed robberies as they traveled across the South. They slept in their car, in the occasional motel room, mostly living on the run and stealing to support themselves, forging checks along the way. At 16, Judith Ann Neelley became pregnant with twins. This didn't slow down the crime-committing couple, though, who continued their robberies well into Judith's pregnancy. A botched robbery at a Georgia mall briefly put the pair behind bars. While incarcerated, Judith gave birth to twins. Upon their release, Alvin Neelley and Judith Ann Neelley reunited, and their criminal actions took a turn for the depraved. On September 25, 1982, Judith spotted 13-year-old Lisa Milliken at Riverbend Mall in Rome, Georgia. She convinced the young girl to join her and Alvin at a motel in nearby Scottsboro, Alabama. Upon arrival, Judith and Alvin seized upon Lisa. Over the course of the following days, they raped and tortured their victim before eventually murdering her. On October 4, 1982, Judith targeted a young engaged couple named Janice Chapman and John Hancock. She claimed to be taking them to a party. In reality, Judith led the couple into the woods where Alvin was waiting. After shooting John Hancock and leaving him for dead, Judith and Alvin kidnapped Janice and brought her back to their Alabama motel room. They again tortured and then murdered their captive. Despite being shot, however, John Hancock had survived his attack. He was able to report the crime to authorities. On October 9, 1982, Judith Neelley was arrested. Alvin was apprehended a few days later. Though both were sent to prison, Judith Neelley was presented as the mastermind behind the killings. Alvin avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to murder and aggravated assault. Judith was not so lucky. She was convicted of the murder of Lisa Milliken and sentenced to death in 1983. The conviction made Judith the youngest woman to be sentenced to death in the United States. After a lengthy appeals process, Judith Neelley's sentence was commuted to life in prison. She continues to spend her life in jail. Alvin lived out the rest of his days behind bars, dying in November of 2005. True crime author Thomas Cook cracks open this twisted case in Early Graves. Drawing on police records from District Attorney Richard E. Gu and investigator Danny Smith, he presents a gut-wrenching account of Alvin and Judith's relationship and their descent into darkness. They were on the road again, this time headed south toward Macon, Georgia. It had been a wild few days. Several months before, someone had called them Bonnie and Clyde, but they'd agreed that they were more like a comedy version of that infamous couple. Later, they'd even come up with a new name for themselves, Bonnie and Claude. But now, after all they'd done in Rome, they were coming close to the real thing. Shootings, fire bombings. That was one way to show people you weren't joking anymore. But there were other ways too, and on the way to Macon, they hatched a few new plans. In prison, he'd been told that if you gave people certain kinds of shots, the cops wouldn't be able to tell they'd been murdered. So they stopped at a drugstore and picked up a few diabetic needles and a bottle of liquid Drano and liquid Plumber. Once on the road again, he kept his eyes on her brown Dodge as it cruised along in front of him. He liked his own car best, a red Ford Granada that he kept nice and neat. That was one of the differences between them. She was sloppy and unkempt, and her car always looked that way. That was one of the reasons he didn't want to drive with her anymore. The other was the way she acted, nice at times, then cold and mean. It was as if she would say things just to tick him off. Then the air would suddenly get sharp, and the whole world would start to ache. Traveling separately and yet together was one way to keep the pain at bay. It was better to have two cars and just talk to each other over the Cobra CB radios they had installed in each of them. Once in Macon, they stayed in another crummy little motel, the kind that smelled dank, as if there were pools of stagnant water under the floor. There were times when they hated it, but when that happened, they just moved on. That seemed to help a little, as if the movement, the endless heading down endless roads, was the only thing that relieved the tension that grew around them when they stopped. The road cut them some slack, but only for a while, only until they stopped again at the next motel. Another one that looked the same, felt the same, had the same crummy furniture and dank wet smell. During their first couple of days in Macon, they came up with lots of great ideas, but finally agreed on just one to start with. He sat on the bed next to her when she dialed the phone. When Mrs. Allen answered, she told her that her husband was beating her up and that she needed help. Then she asked Mrs. Allen if she would meet her at her motel. Mrs. Allen said she would drop by the next day at around 5:30. The couple laughed together about how easy it was going to be. But Mrs. Allen was just the beginning, so the next day they rode around Macon looking for John Brownlee's house, one of the security people from the Macon Youth Development Center. There was a plan to deal with him too, but that would come later, after they'd finished with Mrs. Allen. Then suddenly there was a hitch. At around 5 in the afternoon, someone from the Youth Development Center called to say that Mrs. Allen had to go out of town and would not be able to come to the motel. They suspected Mrs. Allen had lied, and so the next day they drove out to the Youth Development Center office and spotted Allen's car. She'd not been called out of town at all. They shook their heads at what liars other people were. Since Mrs. Allen had slipped by, they decided to go after Brownlee instead. They drove until they found Brownlee's house. Then they drove back to the motel, and she called Brownlee up. She'd always known he had an eye for her, and so she spoke to him flirtatiously, using her hot little country girl act. She wanted to meet him, she said. Then she reminded him he'd once told her that if she were ever in town, he wanted to see her. But Brownlee couldn't meet her because he'd gotten married only a few months before. Maybe some other time, he told her, if he could bring along his wife. After she hung up, they discussed a plan to drop her off at Brownlee's house when no one was at home. She could go through the window and let her husband in. Together, they could wait for the Brownlees to get home. Then he could knock Brownlee out, wait until he came to, and rape his wife in front of him. He could do that to all the wives of the men at the Youth Development Center. Every one of them who had done bad things to his wife. Now he could do bad things to their wives, rape and kill them. That would show them it was really payback time. Perhaps they had slept through it all, he thought, but one child had been awake throughout, and he found himself focusing on her, a 13-year-old girl handcuffed in the car, silently watching as Neelley paced the area, large and looming in the distance, perhaps stopping here and there to lean cautiously over the canyon wall, glance down, then back up at Lisa, making dreadful calculations. Igu knew what she was looking for, a place out of the way, with a sharp edge, a precipitous drop. But he wondered if Lisa had known that too, as she sat in the car, listening to the little hissing breezes that seemed never entirely to abandon the canyon edge. Perhaps instead, Lisa had tried to tell herself that Neelley was looking for something else, a place where she could safely let her go, or let the children play, or much more simply, perhaps only a mountain flower to bring back to them, something soft and pretty to greet them when they woke. But if Lisa had harbored such comforting hopes, they were quickly to be dashed. "What happened after you went back to the car?" Smith asked. "I told her to get out," Neelley said, "and I took her over to the tree, and I told her to lay down right there, and I told her I was going to give her a shot to put her to sleep so I could leave, and she wouldn't know where I was going." Lisa did as she was told, Neelley continued, and while she lay on the ground, handcuffed to a tree, Neelley bent over her and gave her a shot in the left side of her neck, pressing down on the small black plunger, releasing a caustic drain cleaner. Liquid Drano into Lisa Milliken's throat. Igu closed his eyes slowly as he listened. He could almost hear her tiny moan. "The liquid Drano hadn't worked," Neelley went on, "so I got the liquid plumber." There followed another shot on the other side of the neck, but it didn't work either. Lisa continued to lie face down on the ground, Neelley said. She was moaning softly and complaining that the shots were hurting her. Neelley administered another shot, this one in Lisa's left arm, then, after a short interval, another into her right arm. Neither of them worked, and so the next one went into Lisa's right buttock, and still another into her left buttock. And still, it didn't work. She said it was hurting, Neelley said matter-of-factly. But Lisa was still alive, she added. The shots were not killing her. Igu glanced toward the window. It was mid-October, but the cold outside the room seemed like nothing compared to the cold within it. "Why did you think about liquid plumber and Drano?" Smith asked. He answered, "'Cause it had lye in it." Igu felt his breath stop. Half an hour. Terror lengthens, seconds into days. He could not imagine the eternity of half an hour. "Did the shots have any effect?" Smith asked. "She said they burned," Neelley answered dully. "She said she was cold. She wanted me to give her a shirt and let her lay down." He asked, "Did you?" He answered, "Yes." Lisa was burning, and she was cold, but she wouldn't die. Because of that, it was time to take the next step. After Alvin Neelley and Judith Ann Neelley were apprehended for the murders of Lisa Milliken and Janice Chapman, they were each sentenced to life in prison, Alvin in Georgia and Judith in Alabama, never to see each other again. Initially, they were both supposed to receive the death penalty until Alvin pleaded guilty, saving himself from that fate. Judith's death penalty was to be carried out since it was deduced that she was the mastermind behind the couple's gruesome crimes. However, 3 days before her death date, the governor of Alabama instead gave her a sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The governor's decision caused controversy and outrage. Many believed that Judith Ann Neelley deserved the death penalty or at least life imprisonment without parole for her heinous actions. Despite this, Judith has never been approved for parole, being denied in 2018 and as recently as 2023. She will be eligible for parole consideration again in May 2028. Before November 1, 2004, Napa, California was known for its temperate weather, gorgeous scenery, plethora of local vineyards, and quality of life for its residents, which included being a very safe community. Despite the many tourists who flocked from other parts of California, as well as throughout the United States and Europe, crime was not a common occurrence. In fact, Napa had not seen a homicide in over 2 years as Halloween of 2004 rolled around. On that last day of October, roommates Adrienne Insogna, Leslie Mazzara, and Lauren Mianza spent the evening handing out candy to trick-or-treaters that rang the bell at their Dorset Street home. By 11 p.m., the lights were out and all three had turned in, Adrienne and Leslie to their upstairs bedrooms and Lauren to her downstairs bedroom. All would be quiet until around 2 a.m. At that time, Lauren was awakened by the sound of breaking glass and what she would describe as a blood-curdling, terrified scream. She cautiously crept from her bed to head upstairs to investigate. She was stopped when she heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming down the stairs toward her. Terrified, she ran out the back door and into the yard where she hid, perfectly still. She would hear the sounds of someone climbing out of the basement window and running off into the night before she would regain her courage and re-enter the house. She climbed the stairs and, hearing crying coming from Adrienne's room, headed that way. She never could have been prepared for what sight met her. Leslie was face down in a pool of blood. Adrienne was crouched down behind the bed, still alive, but bleeding heavily. There was so much blood in the room that Lauren slipped. She tried to call 911 on the house phone, but the line was dead. She retrieved her mobile phone and called for help while running out to her own car and driving away. She was petrified that the person who attacked her roommates was still in the house or the area. Paramedics arrived on Dorset Street quickly. Leslie was dead. Adrienne would die very soon after the paramedics' arrival. Both of them had been stabbed many, many times. Lauren had not seen anyone, although she had heard the attacks. The local authorities began their investigation. They combed the crime scene and found cigarette butts outside the home. As neither Lauren, Leslie, nor Adrienne smoked, they believed the attacker had lain in wait, biding his time and smoking, before entering the home on his murderous errand. They would also find blood at the scene that was not Leslie's or Adrienne's. It appeared their killer had cut himself. DNA tests, though, would take time. Napa reeled from the savage murders. Because a suspect wasn't caught immediately, residents were terrified and rumors began to swirl. One of the more repeated ones was that Lauren, Leslie, and Adrienne were mixed up with drugs, and the murders were a hit. Another one was that Francis Ford Coppola, who owned the winery Leslie worked at and was therefore Leslie's boss, had mob ties and the ladies were collateral damage. Neither rumor had any basis in truth and fact. The local police believed that Leslie was the intended victim. She had been attacked first and very viciously. The evidence indicated that she had been sleeping when she was first stabbed and had attempted to run away from her killer, headed toward Adrienne's room. Adrienne, it seems, had heard the attack on Leslie and run to her friend's defense, sustaining fatal stab wounds herself in the process. Police began to check into the backgrounds of Adrienne and Leslie, looking for a killer. Adrienne Insogna had cheated death at 16, surviving a near-fatal car crash. The car had rolled 3 times, Adrienne striking her head on the pavement through the open window. Always scrappy, she had survived, a miracle, and returned to school within a few months, although she did suffer with some memory loss as a result of the temporary brain damage caused by the accident. She would heal and excel in school, earning a scholarship to California Polytechnic State University. She pursued her dream of becoming an engineer successfully. Hired on by the city of Napa after she graduated, Adrienne was working there at the time of her murder. Just 4 months before her death, she celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the car accident, the time when she was granted a miracle and cheated death, with one of her closest friends, Lily Prudhomme. Shortly after being hired by the city, she started dating Christian Lee. Their relationship would be rocky, on again and off again. She wanted a serious commitment. He wasn't ready. Adrienne had seen Christian on Halloween night when she dropped by after handing out candy to the kids. She left his place around 10 p.m., and that was the last time he saw her. They had been arguing about her desire for a commitment and about the fact that she had gone to a party recently and met a guy, something that made Christian jealous. Other than the quasi-drama with Christian, Adrienne led a quiet life. She had a circle of friends, including Lily, that she had known for years. She did not have a high-risk lifestyle. Leslie Mazzara, unlike Adrienne, had a huge circle of friends and was extremely outgoing. She was the new girl on the block, having moved to California from Anderson, South Carolina only months earlier. A former beauty queen, Leslie had given consideration to becoming a teacher or an attorney, but seemed stuck. Her mother, Kathy, had gone to Berkeley and had invited her daughter out for the summer to work in one of the wineries and gather her thoughts. From the moment that Leslie arrived in Napa, she seemed to love it. She went to director Francis Ford Coppola's winery and was hired on the spot. The stunning and outgoing young lady was the perfect fit for the winery. What began as a summer job turned into a passion. She decided that she wanted to make the wine business her career. Even when her mother relocated to Michigan, Leslie stayed behind in Napa. For Leslie's family, there seemed little cause for concern. She was well-liked, a smart girl, and Napa was a safe, homey community. Leslie was popular, especially so with men. She didn't appear to be a player or user. In fact, she remained on good terms with everyone she dated. 2 of her South Carolina friends who had visited Leslie only weeks before the murders said that she was dating 2 men at the time. One man was older, and the other, they said, Leslie was quite serious about. The 2 friends had been there when the older man came by and spotted flowers the younger man had sent. They claimed he was furious. Multiple friends of Leslie's said she was a heartbreaker, but an unintentional one. She was a sweet girl who made everyone feel as though he or she was Leslie's best friend. Leslie's computer was searched and an email from an ex was discovered. The 2 had broken up years earlier after he proposed and she turned him down. But he reached out to her not long before her murder. The family of another man had sent her on a cruise and she received a car as a gift from another man. A month before her death, Leslie had returned to South Carolina for a friend's wedding, toting a new set of luggage she received from another admirer. This same friend would report that the night Leslie was murdered, the father of a man Leslie had broken up with had tried repeatedly to reach her by telephone. Between Adrienne and Leslie seemed more likely in the eyes of the police to be the intended target. They felt that she may have crossed paths with someone who grew obsessed with her The murders were clearly not random. The killer had waited outside and then, upon gaining entry to the house, headed straight upstairs. Police interviewed more than 1,500 people, obtaining DNA samples with no matches or further leads. They interrogated Christian Lee the day that Adrian was murdered, even getting a DNA sample. They interviewed and obtained samples from the men Leslie had dated. No luck. The lack of any suspects or arrests frustrated the victims' families and friends, who felt they had to defend their reputations and fight to keep the investigation going. Time passed and went on for others. Lily Prudhomme, Adrian's best friend, decided after Adrian's murder that life was too short, and after putting it off the year before, married her boyfriend, Eric Koppel. Adrian's mother, Arlene, attended the wedding, where the song She Will Be Loved, Adrian's favorite song, was played in her honor. It was a joyous occasion and yet still sad, as someone was clearly missing from the Prudhomme-Koppel wedding party. In South Carolina, a fundraiser called the Raising Race was organized in Leslie's memory to raise funds for Calvary Home for Children, a charity Leslie worked closely with when she was a beauty queen and living in the area. The Raising Race is a South Carolina version of the Amazing Race and helmed by survivor contestants Rob and Amber, who met Leslie's friend Kelly while competing on the Amazing Race. In September of 2005, almost a year after the murders, the local police decided to publicly release the evidence about the cigarette butts and the fact they were Turkish gold, a variation of camels that had only been on the market for a very short period of time and were unusual. Tests revealed that the DNA on the cigarettes matched the blood DNA in the upstairs bedroom. The police felt that revealing the brand of cigarettes would result in someone knowing who the killer was. They had no idea the killer would contact them himself. It was a Tuesday night. All the detectives working the case had left for the day. Eric Koppel showed up at the station with his wife, Lily, and other family members. Like other Napa residents, he had heard about the Turkish gold cigarettes being found at the crime scene and, believing he was about to be caught, confessed to having killed Adrian and Leslie. Eric Koppel's arrest was a mixture of relief and devastation. Adrian's mother, Arlene, was shocked and horrified that the husband of Adrian's best friend, the wedding she herself had attended in place of Adrian, had murdered her daughter. For Leslie's family, there was a sense of relief that Leslie was not the sole target, but equal confusion, as Eric didn't know Leslie. The police came under scrutiny with Koppel's arrest. They had never interviewed him nor taken a DNA sample, despite being in Adrian's inner circle and having been to the Dorset Street home. They had apparently called him at the beginning of the investigation and left messages, which Koppel did not return, but never followed up. The police chief, after the arrest, said they would have eventually spoken to Eric and obtained a DNA sample. Eric provided one after his arrest, and to no surprise, his DNA matched that on the cigarettes and in the blood found in the house. In January of 2007, Eric Koppel was sentenced to life in prison after a plea deal was agreed upon by Koppel, the DA, and the victims' families, which took the death penalty off the table. The mothers of both Leslie and Adrian addressed Koppel in the court. Arlene, Adrian's mother, recounted that her daughter never wore turtlenecks in life, but was buried in one to attempt to cover the wounds Koppel left on her body. She counted out the number of stab wounds he had delivered to Adrian's body. Leslie's mother, Kathy, read a 13-page letter. Koppel did not look at either Arlene or Kathy as they made their statements. Koppel's wife and Adrian's best friend, Lily, spoke. She admitted to grieving with Adrian's mother, but said that she knew a gentler Eric than the Eric that murdered her friend. She publicly proclaimed support for her husband, going so far as to tell him that there was nothing in this world that you could do that would make me love you less. Before he was sentenced, Koppel himself spoke. He apologized to the Insognia and Mazzara families, even crying. He blamed the murders on the death of his grandfather, which sent him into a depression, along with the alcohol he was using in an attempt to cope with the depression. He said that he was going to kill himself, but decided instead to turn himself in so there would be closure to the case. Lily herself said that Eric killed because of his depression. Despite her claim that he could do nothing to change her love for him, she did later divorce him, but inexplicably kept his name. Why did Eric Koppel kill? Was it depression? Alcohol? The Napa police never publicly stated a motive for the murders. It was not a coincidence that November 1st, 2004 was the date that he and Lily Prudhomme had initially planned to marry. She had backed out. Lily later said that she and Adrian would discuss their relationships with each other, as girlfriends do. It's possible that Lily may have decided to call off the wedding after one of these discussions. Maybe she told Eric, maybe not. But Eric's decision to murder her best friend was one of extreme passive aggressiveness toward Lily. He couldn't kill her, didn't want to kill her, so he could do the next best thing to punish Lily. Maybe he was even attracted to Adrian. He had been to the house before. He likely knew that Adrian slept upstairs, but probably didn't know Lauren slept downstairs, which spared her life. He had never met Leslie, and it's probable he didn't know that there were 3 women living in the home. In all likelihood, he only expected 2 women, Adrian and Lauren. Adrian, always the scrappy one, had attacked him after he stabbed Leslie. She had drawn blood, leaving behind more DNA evidence. Good for her. It's unusual that Eric Koppel had no record when he murdered Adrian and Leslie. He was on no one's radar. Lily herself stated that someone surely had noticed something. The killer must have been acting strangely. How could it not be noticed? She also had said she hoped that Adrian had injured her killer. All the while, Eric Koppel was sitting beside her. Lauren Mayanza, the roommate who survived that brutal night, left Napa and relocated to LA. She said she felt safer in a larger city where violence was the norm. Eric Koppel remains behind bars where he is serving 2 life sentences with no possibility of parole. In 2015, Maria Sosa allegedly spoke with a man she thought was a hitman and offered him money and gifts if he would kill her husband, Houston area boxing coach Ramon Sosa. Maria Sosa was born Maria Lourdes Durante in Mexico on February 11, 1974. She was a dancer known as Lulu at a salsa club known as Mi Luna, which is where she met retired boxer Ramon Sosa in 2007. The couple got married 2 years later, the second marriage for Ramon, as he was divorced with 3 adult children. Maria became a U.S. citizen later on in the marriage, with Ramon helping not only Maria, but her mother and her own teenage children become legalized citizens. A year later, the couple opened Woodland Boxing and Fitness, a gym in Houston. Once Maria received her citizenship, she underwent a noticeable change in personality. Mia Sosa, Ramon's daughter, stated in an interview that Maria wanted nothing to do with her stepchildren and resorted to starting fights and causing disarray amongst the family. Ramon himself revealed that while they were on vacation in Puerto Rico, Maria started an argument that led to her calling hotel security with accusations that Ramon was abusing her, only for her statements to be proven false. By March of 2015, Maria took money from their gym and used it to get a divorce lawyer, while continuing to make random accusations of embezzlement, abuse, and even rape against Ramon, all of which were rebuffed. Maria turned heel months later by planning to have Ramon killed, even going as far voicing her murderous desire to a friend protege of Ramon's in Gustavo, who was often called Mundo. When asked by Maria if he knew someone who could kill Ramon, he recommended someone to her. But afterwards, Mundo went straight to Ramon and informed his mentor about Maria's heel turn and her plot against him. The pair worked together to have the villainess arrested, which included going to the police, who sent an officer to go undercover and pose as a hitman and meet Maria. The meeting saw Maria vent and lash out against Ramon and repeatedly voice her desire to want her ex-husband dead. As part of the scheme, Ramon's death was staged as he was placed in a shallow grave and portrayed himself as having been fatally shot near the temple, with Maria being shown the photo of the deceased Ramon. The villainess actually smiled and laughed over the image before paying the hitman. But on the following day, Maria ended up arrested as she returned to the gym. In October of 2016, Maria pleaded guilty to the murder-for-hire scheme and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She had been denied parole at every turn, and with the year she had already served following her arrest, she is set to be released sometime in July of 2035, which would see Maria reach the age of 61. Throughout the entire trial, Maria refused to look at Ramon and showed no remorse for her actions. Plain and simple, Maria was greedy, callous, and cold-hearted. This, in my view, is a classic case of a person who had nothing. Then after seeing that they've hit the jackpot, they want it all, and will even resort to murder to get it. Maria definitely believed that she won the lottery when she married Ramon. She went from being a dancer to being a prominent businesswoman, but it wasn't enough for Maria. After getting what she had longed for, she showed her true colors and started biting the hand that fed her in a quest to get everything. And when she didn't get what she wanted, she saw Ramon as an obstacle and planned to eliminate him. In all, Maria Sosa was truly a cold-blooded villainess, and this true crime tale continues to fascinate me every time I think about it. On October 16, 2016, Maria Sosa was sentenced to up to 20 years in prison. At the time of writing, Sosa is serving her time at the Christina Melton Crane Unit. After a whirlwind romance, Christe Chen thought she'd found the man of her dreams. Now that man, Bradley Dawson, is sitting in a Fiji jail cell, accused of brutally murdering her. When Christe Chen married Bradley Dawson 3 months after they met, friends of the recent pharmacy school graduate were concerned, but also hopeful she'd finally found the love of her life. It was a shock, says Chen's friend Morris Apri, of her decision to marry the recently divorced Dawson, 38, a Memphis-based IT specialist. It happened so quickly. Now her friends are struggling to make sense of the nightmare that unfolded just 2 days into the couple's honeymoon in July at one of the planet's most beautiful locations, Fiji's ultra-private Turtle Island, where villas start at $3,500 a night. Bradley Dawson, 38, is charged with murdering his new wife, Christe Chen, 36, on the night of July 8th. He was arrested after allegedly fleeing that night to the nearby island of Matakawalevu and is being held without bail until trial. Bradley Dawson claimed through his lawyer that Chen's death was an accident. Her family's lawyer, Ronald Gordon, said that Chen died of multiple blunt force trauma wounds to her head and face. It doesn't look like it was an accidental pushing, and she fell and hit her head, and something happened, Gordon stated. A woman who was also staying at the Turtle Island Resort, which can accommodate up to 14 couples at any given time, told Fiji authorities she saw the couple on the night of the alleged fight, but said they appeared to be in good spirits. Other witnesses allegedly heard the newlyweds arguing at a dinner the night Chen was killed. Dawson admitted that he and Chen did have a drunken argument that evening. Sometime that evening, the woman who said they seemed fine at dinner reportedly heard loud banging sounds from the couple's suite, according to a police report. It was as if someone was drunk and unable to control themselves inside, the woman told police. And then we heard a loud scream followed by a big, loud bang, and after that, there was complete silence. Resort staff confirmed to the news outlet that someone had lodged a noise complaint that night. According to Dawson, he chose to board a kayak after the fight and leave the resort for a neighboring island in an alleged attempt to de-escalate the situation. I just wanted to give her some space, Dawson told reporters, implying Chen was still alive when he left. It was normal for me to take a walk. Dawson would have had to have kayaked more than 3 miles in the Pacific Ocean to reach Matakawalevu from the resort. Chen's family lawyer, Ronald Gordon, told Fox News Dawson left his GPS-enabled watch, but took his passport and wallet with him when he left to kayak and ultimately ended up on Matakawalevu. A housekeeper found Chen's body the following day when the newlyweds failed to show up for breakfast. Dawson was arrested 2 days later on the west coast of Fiji's mainland, Viti Levu, in the town of Nadi. His location was reportedly given away by indigenous residents on a nearby remote island after Dawson allegedly tried to flee. Fiji authorities said Dawson initially confessed to the murder before lawyering up. Dawson was an IT specialist for a nonprofit organization that works with children until his recent suspension in light of the allegations. He appeared for a preliminary bail hearing at the Lautaka High Court on Wednesday, where Judge Riaz Hamza rejected requests for Dawson's pretrial release. Dawson's defense lawyer, Iqbal Khan, argued the case could take 2 years, asking, why should he remain inside for that long? Judge Hamza also denied a request by Gordon to have the Chen family as a formal party in the case, which could allow relatives less restricted access to the evidence presented in the trial. They can still attend hearings. Chen graduated from the University of Tennessee and worked as a pharmacist in a Memphis area Kroger. She was a noted community pharmacy resident at the university's Health Science Center, having received awards in pharmaceutical science. Neighbors stated they hadn't heard the couple argue in the past. The relationship had been a whirlwind romance, with some of Chen's friends claiming they hadn't met Dawson until the couple married in February. The couple embarked on their honeymoon 5 months later. The Turtle Island Resort is a 5-star luxury destination with sweeping views, offering rooms at several $1,000s per night, according to their website. The resort had also served as a vacation destination for Dawson and a previous wife just 2 years ago. It's unclear why the couple divorced, but Good Morning America reported the divorce wasn't finalized until the month before Dawson married Chen. His college ex-girlfriend told the program that, when they dated in 2005, the romance was definitely intense and fast. But that, after they became serious, Dawson was very verbally manipulative and threatening and jealous, and that he'd pushed her down and chased her. Gordon said Chen's family might seek a wrongful death lawsuit against Dawson in the future. If convicted, he faces life in prison. A former Chase employee and her husband stole $50,000 from a dementia-ridden man, then killed his daughter and grandson after they started asking questions, police say. Cynthia Stack, 52, and 22-year-old Sean Stack were found shot to death in their Center Hill, Florida apartment on July 18th. Joshua Ramsawmy, 28, was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with a firearm, while his wife, Amelia Bissoon, 25, was charged with 2 counts of principal to first-degree murder. It all started when a 25-year-old banker at Chase Bank met a 75-year-old customer named Jerry Stack. Officers say Amelia Bissoon and her husband Joshua Ramsawmy murdered Jerry's daughter Cynthia Stack and her son Sean on July 18, 2018. Ramsawmy and Bissoon were said to have killed the mother and son in efforts to cover up that they were stealing money from Cynthia's father, who suffered a traumatic brain injury and is said to possibly have dementia. Cynthia's father even went as far to follow Bissoon when she moved to a different location. Bissoon is said to have made 2 $25,000 checks out to her young son, taking the money from the man's account. Ramsawmy was said to have then opened 2 Bank of America accounts and deposited the money in them. According to police, Cynthia began inquiring about the money, which would eventually lead to Ramsawmy buying a gun and shooting them both. The couple wouldn't come forth with the truth initially, but Bissoon eventually admitted to her husband killing the two. Neither of the suspects had had previous records. A neighbor found Cynthia dead on a futon on July 19th when she was walking her dog and noticed their door was still open. Sean was discovered by Orlando police in a different part of the apartment when they arrived on the scene at approximately 7 a.m. The family's puppy, less than a year old, was found also at the scene and taken by the Orlando Police Department. It's a sad and sick situation for people to take advantage of someone like that, said Emily Rivera, Cynthia's daughter and Sean's younger sister. They did nothing to deserve this. They were an innocent family minding their own business, trying to live their life like everyone else. Sean was just always so grateful for what he had, even though he didn't have that much, she added. My mother was, always trying to spread her love to other people, always trying to help other people. She was just the sweetest woman. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.